What's up, everybody? Welcome back once again. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel, this time for the Saturday three-game slate. That's right, we have three games across the day on Saturday as we close out the regular season coming to an end. But we're here to help you out as much as we can. Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Single game $1 million winner, joined by Jack, architect of the lineup builder, many time short slate GPP winner. Jack, what's up, man? Twice in 1 week, special week.
Yeah, this is great. I think this is getting us ready for playoffs, right? I think we're going to have a healthy dose of these and a three-gamer this time, which we haven't had for a little bit.
Yeah, the last one we had was Thanksgiving, and the setup's going to be basically just like Thanksgiving with the games at 1, 4:30, and 8. So plenty of time to late swap in between. Plenty of time to think about the decisions all day. So what we're going to do in this video, a little bit different than the past couple of short slate videos because we do have three games on the slate. We will go team by team, talk about the injuries and some interesting usage notes that we think will be important for this slate. We will talk about the underperformers. There are two underperforming wide receivers on this slate. And then we will close it out with, the short slate strategies by now if you've been watching our videos. But we'll talk about which ones are the most impactful for this slate and how we can use them for our lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings. And don't worry, for those of you who just want the picks, just listen, read between the lines. There will be some explicit suggestions here, but we will give you picks throughout the show. So, Jack, let's not waste everyone's time. Let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about. 1 o'clock, 4:30, and 8:10. The first game is LA in New England. Let's start with LA. And when I mention these injuries and usage notes for these teams, Jack, I'm also going to talk about where they sit in the playoff race. And I think if you're new to NFL, or perhaps even if you've been around for a while and maybe there's this myth that teams who are fighting for playoff position perform better than teams who are out of the playoffs. Jack, I don't know what you've read, but I know for sure that that's not necessarily the case. Vegas odds typically underproject teams that are out of the playoffs. We see them still play pretty hard, and as a result, we see fantasy production and fantasy projections underproject teams that are out of the playoffs. And so we can use that to our advantage on this Saturday slate where we have a few teams who are already out.
Yeah, I don't have any data handy, but we're reading from some handicappers that the way the saying goes, if you have to win in the final week or two of the season, you're not that good because
True.
if you were really good, you wouldn't have to win. So yeah, I think it proves your point. And then you got these teams fast and loose; they don't care, right? So yeah, I think we can play into that a little bit.
All right, so let's start with LA and New England. LA about a 6 point road favorite here in New England. And just really quickly, no weather issues to speak of. There may be some rain in LA and New England. Earlier in the week, there was some heavy rain forecast for Denver and Cincinnati. It looks like that has subsided. But keep an eye out. Watch the betting markets and see if any totals drop to let us know if you're playing the Showdown slate specifically, if we should be building for a weather-related defensive slogfest in our Showdown lineups. But again, LA and New England. LA Jack, they are fighting for playoffs and seeding, and some really interesting offensive injuries to talk about here. Let's start at the tight end position for LA because you and I were talking right before we went live, and Will Dissly is expected to be back. Perhaps Hayden Hurst will be back as well. Stone Smart performed admirably in their absence. When Hayden Hurst returned last game, it was still Stone Smart who ran most of the routes. And Jack, around the industry, most sites, if not all sites, are anticipating that Will Dissly will just get his starting job back here and run most of the routes. His projection is way higher than Stone Smart's. Now, LA reporters aren't the best when it comes to fantasy purposes, but we don't know for sure. So I think this is a situation we could potentially take advantage of, whether it's on the Showdown slate or on the Classic slate, with the field overconfident in Disley just stepping right back into that role.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this before that the Chargers heavily rotate this position anyway, right? And so I guess the first thing I would look at is the ownership, and like you said, Isley looks like he's the only one, probably the only one that's really going to get any ownership on the three gamer, right?
Yep. Yep. And he.
So
Yep.
the question is like, do you even want to mess around with the other guys, or do you just kind of say, all right, this guy's kind of chalky and he might score zero. Maybe I just will avoid him entirely. I mean, that's kind of the question I think that might be in people's minds on a three gamer is do you even bother with this tight end room?
Yeah, I don't think you have to, right? Especially if you're playing smaller contests, right? Just avoid the situation entirely, and maybe that's enough leverage in fading the 15 or 20% owned Will Dissly if that's where he ends up. I think the true leverage lies in the Showdown slate where they're roughly the same price, especially on DraftKings, and Dissly is getting the majority of the ownership. That to me is a great pivot to Stone Smart if you're looking for just that one piece in your flex spots to be different from the rest of your lineup. But if you're playing 20 plus lineups or 150 plus lineups on the classic slate, I think you have to include Stone Smart in your player pool because we get a 1% $3,400 tight end on DraftKings, and that could be the difference in winning the biggest prizes that either site has to offer.
Yeah, and I think we'll see this as we get to the other games, but tight end's pretty bad
Yeah.
on this slate, right? There's literally one guy that the model likes, and I think just to kind of steal from the Occupy plug in the main sites, it's like when in doubt, you just stack the tight end, right? So if you're gonna play Herbert and you want to use the tight end, I think we'll put the vote out there for Smart. His ADOT is literally twice of Will Dissly on the season, and he runs a route 90% of the time versus like 83. So at 1% ownership, those are some good metrics to try if you're going to even go there.
Love that call. And by the way, so you mentioned the daily plug for those who are members of OccupyFantasy.com. Our writer Bismo already got the plug out early this Friday morning. We're actually recording this 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Friday evening. But the plug is up with showdown notes as well as rankings and lineup construction tips for all contest types across the three gamers. So just go check that out. It's linked in the description. Go check it out after you watch this video. Now, in the running back room for LA Jack, J.K. Dobbins expected to return. He was activated from injured reserve today. Gus Edwards is out. That leaves Dobbins leading the way. The team is optimistic that he will suit up tomorrow. Multiple national reports indicating that. And Kamani Vidal will be the number 2 running back. When Edwards was out earlier in the season, Dobbins saw about 75% of the work compared to Kamani Vidal's 25% of the work. And this was in weeks 6 through 9 when Gus Edwards missed. I guess the question to you, Jack, is one, if we look on FanDuel, they dropped the ball. Shocker. And J.K. Dobbins is $4,000, the minimum price on FanDuel. He's going to be like 85% owned. So I want to ask you, one, what do you do with that? And two, what is the likelihood that they ease Dobbins back in after a 4-week IR stint and not just rush him back into a 75-80% snap share?
Yeah, I'm really torn, man. I will throw it back to you for your thoughts, but I mean, the argument for him would be, I think you've seen this in some main sites where the plug basically says, "Hey, play this minimum price starting running back." It's not even really about whether or not he's gonna boom and score a bunch of points. It's just about he's gonna do something, and it's gonna allow you to do awesome things with the rest of your lineup. So I mean, that's the argument to play him, right? The argument against is we have 3 elite running backs on the slate: Connor, Kyron Williams, Chase Brown. We do have some receiver value, so it's very conceivable you could build a lineup that you don't need him. And the Chargers' running game and running back room and stuff is not. It's just not that exciting. So that's kind of I don't have a decision, but that's kind of my seeing each side. What are you thinking?
Yeah, again, at 4K, this is a vastly different decision on DraftKings versus FanDuel. FanDuel minimum price, I think I would probably end up at least matching the field 75-80% because we do have Jamar Chase 9,600, Puka 8,700, T Higgins 8K, Cooper Kupp 7,600, McConkey 72, Sutton 7. So like there are stud receivers that we want to get up to. It also allows us to get up to Kyron and James Conner and Chase Brown in another running back spot. So it's tough to get away from at 4K because, like you said, even if he scores 6, 7 points, it's what he allows you to do with the rest of your lineup. And he's so highly owned that he could bust and you could still win first place in the largest GPP. As a result, we've seen it time and time again. When I won, I think it was 100K on FanDuel a few years ago, and there was a situation with Jalen Samuels, backup running back. He only scored like 6, 7 points, but is what he allowed to do with the rest of my lineup. And even though that was technically a bust, you could still win 100K with that type of player in your lineup. Now, on DraftKings, it's $5,800. I'd be much more willing to fade him over here in the hopes that his workload isn't what it was pre-injury.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear for folks, I think anything on small field FanDuel, like
Yeah.
less 500 entrants or less, just if he's in, just automatic play 100%, right? I mean, there's no question.
Yes.
Any 10% of people that aren't using him are missing out. And so when we say you might fade him, that's a large field only thing. And yeah, I think I'm with you. I kind of lean 80 to 100%. I mean, after talking it through with you, but there are ways to not use him. Okay, so that's the running back room. There any other injuries in this game?
Just a couple defensive injury to monitor. Denzel Perryman, their middle linebacker, is out. So if you're looking for some reasons to play New England Patriots offensive players, there's one. LA is missing their right guard Trey Pipkins, so it's a slight downgrade to their offense as well. If we flip to the other side in this game, really no truly impactful injuries. Their center for the Patriots, Ben Brown, is likely out with a concussion, so that's another downgrade to this offensive line. Kyle Duggar, their safety, is likely going to play. He's questionable on the injury report. Really quickly, New England, Jack, they are eliminated, but quote playing to win, and this coaching staff seems like the prototypical staff that's going to continue to play the way they've been playing, no matter what the playoff race is. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up for the viewers to decide. But there were some questions about whether or not we see Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, the rookie receivers who a lot of people were high on coming into this year, and they just haven't played much at all. And the reporters were asking, is it possible we see more of Polk and Baker in these final two games? And these are the types of spots we would love to see on a short slate where we get these guys at super low ownership. However, they immediately threw a wet towel onto that idea because no, they haven't shown enough in practice, was the direct quote. So Jack, we won't see it. We'll continue to see Kendrick Bourne and Keyshawn Boutte and Demario Douglas at receiver for New England.
One of our favorite pastimes, Kendrick Bourne. Yeah, and these I don't know what I have FanDuel up. Can touch on the ownership? The ownership on these New England pass catchers is kind of high.
Yeah.
Like anything over 10% to me on these guys is high, and we have 20 to 30% on some of these guys. So, and on the tight ends too. So I mean, I guess we're probably kind of going game by game here. So, I mean, what's your 2 cents on using these popular, semi-popular kind of players that again could easily score zero? I mean, would you use them only in a game stack in a small field lineup, or would you be clicking them in as value plays, or do you have anyone you're targeting based on ownership or upside?
Not really. I mean, again, when they're non-zero owned on a three-game slate, that isn't super appealing to me. And if you look at their usage recently, they've been running a lot more two tight end sets at the expense of Demario Douglas. Austin Hooper, 65% of the routes over the last two games, 8 targets the last two games, which is pretty high. It's extremely high for a tight end, too. It makes him playable on a three-game slate, which is something I thought we'd never say. You compare that to Hunter Henry, 82% of the routes and 13 targets over the last two games. I think and obviously they're a little more owned, especially Hunter Henry, but I would much prefer to target the Patriot tight ends in this game than the Patriots receivers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we should touch on it briefly too. The running back room for them, no injuries really, but there's some maybe running back by committee stuff going on with Stevenson Gibson. That does make them both very low owned, cheap running backs. It's probably a different question for FanDuel DraftKings, right? Because on FanDuel, it's like if Dobbins is in, why would I play Stevenson at 2K higher when he's going to get half the workload? But on DraftKings, I guess I'm curious: are those either of those guys interesting to you or not?
Yeah, they're cheaper than Dobbins on DraftKings, and we saw Gibson play more snaps last week. Stevenson's still a guy that gets work as well, and I think they use both of these guys enough. And they're such a loser team that they're going to run the ball no matter what the score is and get the ball to their running backs. So I think they're in play, and I love the ownership on them. So yeah, I think they're great differentiators in high risk contests as a result because everyone's going to rush to play Chase Brown and Kyron and maybe Connor. Dobbins, especially on FanDuel. And then we have a bunch of question marks after that. And I think the New England running backs are right there at the top of questionable running backs that could hit value at low ownership.
Great. One more note on this game. LA Chargers side, Herbert's, I don't know what DraftKings, but he's pretty low owned
Yeah.
for a 3-game slate. And this match, I mean, New England is horrendous at defense. I think they're like bottom 5 against the pass and the run by EPA. I'm just looking. So we have him firmly in the lower half, and 10 to 15%. I mean, I'm just gonna say like I'm super interested in at least playing a three man Herbert stack as a core play. We have an underperforming wide receiver in Joshua Palmer. We have Conky. We have the tight ends to throw in there. And I guess we'll get into the strategy at the end, but probably one bring back. Do you think I would probably lean you force one bring back in a 3-gamer? But what are your thoughts on just the Chargers stacking and use of game stacks, or just would you roll out Chargers only?
No, I think on a 3-gamer, I would run it back, especially with the tight end usage, the running back usage. The receivers are on the field. And Herbert, number one in our Occupy model for this week. So the model's picking up on this matchup as well. Really love Justin Herbert this week. Super affordable. Has been running more this season, which always helps the value for the quarterback. And again, you mentioned Joshua Palmer, one of the two underperforming wide receivers on this slate. He is the lower owned of the two. We expect him to be right around 10% owned. Expected to have scored 36 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Has only scored 24. Only a matter of time before he capitalizes on that. So you play something like Herbert, McConkey, and Joshua Palmer running back with one of the New England tight ends or running backs. You still have 57.80 left per player in a 3-1 stack for LA on DraftKings. Fit in a lot of extra pieces around that. So, Jack, I think while many people are stacking Denver and Cincinnati and then the Rams side in the Arizona game, I think this is very overlooked for the first game on the slate.
Yeah, and then last note before we shift, I think just you mentioned it at the top, but Perryman being out, they're a very different defense without him. You even have in the notes here, boost the tight end. So I think combining the tight end usage you just mentioned, ownership, and just that injury, I mean that's enough to. There's like a very core small field play, right? A Herbert 3-man stack with a tight end run back.
Yeah, and then if you do this, you can play the best projected, the highest owned guys around it, and have a really nice small field lineup. So, for those who say we don't give out lineups or picks, here you go. We just did it right on screen here as we.
Merry Christmas,
Yeah,
Merry Christmas, guys.
yeah. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you. All right, let's talk about this second game: Denver and Cincinnati. Denver fighting for the playoffs in seeding. Cincinnati technically fighting for the playoffs. They're still mathematically eligible to make the postseason, so they'll continue to play their guys as well. Let's start with the Denver running backs. This is easily every week the hardest situation to predict. We made some money on the most recent Broncos Showdown slate, but only because Jaleel McLaughlin was out. He's returning this week, making it probably the cloudiest backfield in the entire NFL. Let me get your take, Jack. So they've been playing Javonte Williams around 50% of the snaps no matter what. Jaleel's been mixing him. Audric Estime, despite all the hype the coaches have been giving him, they refuse to give him more than like 20% of the playing time. Even last week, when Jaleel was out, they still didn't give him that much more work, just a few more early down runs. I think the most interesting thing to me here is no one's going to be super popular from this group on the 3-game slate. But the coaching staff was trying to get Jaleel to be the guy in week 15. They started him. He got 9 or 11 touches before getting hurt in the third quarter. Missed last week. Now he's back. I'm wondering, do they try to go back to that and we get Jaleel McLaughlin at 1-2% ownership on a classic slate? I really like the idea of playing for that.
Yeah, and this is another one where I mean, Javonte Williams just always seems to get some ownership. I don't know what it is, but at 20%, I listen on FanDuel, especially if Dobbins is in. I just I can't. I'd much rather play Dobbins than one of the three 8K guys. Yeah, I think let's see, McLaughlin's the same price. Yeah, so he's gonna get zero. I guess the question is this like a showdown only thing, or would you actually entertain like? Maybe it's a DraftKings question if he's like minimum price versus obviously you wouldn't have the luxury of the minimum price Dobbins over there.
Yeah, so Jaleel is 4,700 on DraftKings, which is close to the minimum over there. So I think he's a much better DraftKings play, especially with his theoretical pass catching. And yeah, it is a lot tougher on FanDuel. I think this is probably only a 20 plus or mass multi entry play. I don't think I would play him in small field and on either site. So I guess it's really just a large field only play for me.
But again, the reason you're advocating it is not because you think like he might score 5 points and that'll be optimal. It's because you're saying there's a chance he might get the starter's workload, right?
Yeah,
And no one is projecting that. So really, it is a higher upside play than a typical like cheap backup running back play.
for sure. Exactly. All right.
But
Other
it might score zero.
who still might score zero. Yes, exactly. On Denver side, cornerback Riley Moss returns a slight boost to their pass defense. I think the one guy we have to talk about here who's absolutely been just ruining things on showdown slates is Marvin Mims, who, when he gets in the game, they're force feeding him the ball, putting him in the backfield, jet sweeps, design screens, deep shots. He caught that 97-yard one on that showdown slate a few weeks ago. But the most intriguing thing to me, Jack, is Marvin Mims played a season high 47% of the snaps last week, third behind Cortland Sutton and Devon Vele. If he's going to play 50% of the snaps and they're getting him the ball when he's on the field, I think we have to be interested in high risk contests.
Yeah, and I think this is similar, a little similar to the LA side in that it's a cheap stack that's not very owned, and it lets you play all those really high end, expensive, chalky guys around it. So yeah, I mean, I think you'll see. Obviously, we're gonna get to Cincinnati. You'll see a lot of Burrow, Chase, Higgins kind of stuff, right? But you can play Nick's two pass catchers, one of those receivers, and then you can still fit in like some of those expensive running backs. So yeah, I mean, I like it. I think I'm not an expert on this receiver room. I'll probably just lean on your recommendations there and just try to get a mix of all of these receivers. I mean, unless you have any other strong leans about guys to not use, but
I don't think so. They've been pretty consistent, surprisingly, at least in the top two. Sutton obviously is the alpha, and then Devon Vele has been pretty consistently their number two the past couple of weeks. Now, Sean Payton could always switch this up and screw us, but they've been humming pretty good on offense, so I think they'll keep the same guys. But like you said, similar to Justin Herbert, where Knicks can run a little bit, you pair him up with Sutton and or Vele or Marvin Mims, running back with any of the Cincinnati studs. Let's go to Cincinnati, by the way, and we look at their receiver room. T. Higgins technically questionable, limited practices in all 3 days this week. I haven't seen any concerns from Bengals beat reporters. They're normally pretty tuned in, so I would expect he plays. I haven't seen any national reports or any concern there. So let's assume T. Higgins plays. Again, we are recording this Friday evening, but if for some reason he is out and you're not able to contact us or have any content before the game start, just know that if he is out for some reason, Andre Yosivach will be the wide receiver 2. Jermaine Burton will be the wide receiver 3. Their ownership and their projections will bump up as a result. But Jack, I assume we're just going to play Higgins as normal, assuming we get no negative reports between now and game time.
yep. I think you have to. Like we always say, you got to assume these guys are in. Is it, how do you pronounce it? Eosivas?
Yosivach, like Yoshi from Mario. Yeah.
Yoshivas. Yoshivas. Yeah, I mean 5% at least on FanDuel is super low. I don't know if yeah, I think he's probably low on DraftKings too, but I mean that's the one that sticks out to me here. Like even if Higgins plays for his price, he gets quite a bit of opportunity.
Yes, he does. Yoshivash and Burrow trust him around the goal line as well. Scores a lot of touchdowns when he gets the opportunity. So, yeah, I think Yoshi, and he's already won someone a big top prize on a short slate this year as the wide receiver 3 when both other guys were in. So, why not again this Saturday? Defensive end Sam Hubbard, one of their pass rushers, is out. So, if you're looking for a reason to bump Denver's passing game, there it is. I think a sneaky injury is Tanner Hudson, their tight end. Cincinnati has been playing a bunch of tight ends all year. And with Tanner Hudson out once again, that just opens up a couple more routes, a couple more snaps for Drew Sample, for Mike Gesicki. Now, Drew Sample led last week with 22 routes. Gesicki came in second with 14. But you look at the last 2 games, it's still Gesicki, Jack, as the receiving tight end. 6 targets the last 2 games. Sample with just 2. Cam Grandy with just 2. So Gesicki, super cheap. Especially on, I think he's going to be super low owned on FanDuel, relatively popular on DraftKings. So this is a situation where depending on the site you're playing, it'll depend whether or not you consider him a high or low owned play.
Yeah, and again, what you're saying is backed up by the numbers. Gesicki runs a route 93% of the time. Sample's just 65. Sample's A dot is literally 2 yards. So, Gazeki's 9. So yeah, I mean, I think this is similar to the Charger situation. Stone Smart, the analogy is to Gasicki, right? Runs more
Yeah,
routes, runs deeper routes. It's kind of gross, but if you're playing a quarterback and you want to, that's the tight end you stack with for upside.
I agree. Now, what if you're stacking the Cincinnati side just in general, Jack, with Joe Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Yoshi, Chase Brown, the tight end? So lots of different ways you can go. And this game does look super appealing. It has the highest total on the board at 50 points. So I imagine this will be a popular target for stacking, but I'm still not sure the field, and we'll talk about this in the strategy section in a little bit, is going to 4-man stack Cincinnati or 5-man stack Cincinnati or running back with multiple Broncos players.
Oh, I mean, we see this. I think the difference between the 2 and the 3 gamer is the 4-man stacking wins less, but it's higher leverage, so it wins even more often than the field uses it because they use it more on a 2 gamer. And yeah, I think because Yoshivas is low owned, Gasicki's low owned, they're cheap. Like that is your path to being able to do it, right? You can eat some of these chalky high end Bengals guys and play one of them, and that checks a box of playing a low owned player, and it gets you a unique lineup construction with a lot of upside.
Things we love on short slates. All right, anything else on this game, Jack, before we move on to the finale, the nighttime?
Let's go to the finale.
Our Cardinals versus the Rams in this game. Cardinals are officially eliminated from the playoffs. They were last week. Rams are still fighting for the playoffs, but also seeding within the playoffs. So interesting matchup here, and we've seen it time and time again. Divisional foes, one's eliminated, one is fighting, and oftentimes you see the team that's eliminated come out on top just because of they're still fighting and they're looking to play spoiler against a team that they don't like very much. So don't expect Arizona to roll over and die here. However, as much as we love to stack Arizona, Jack, I think the biggest issue here is they're now missing both of their offensive tackles. They lost Paris Johnson last week. They lose Jonah Williams this week, left tackle and right tackle. Already an offensive line that was dealing with issues in pass protection. This just makes it so much worse, and it's my biggest fear in stacking this game.
Yeah, it is sad. Like I know I'm gonna do it and I'm just gonna tilt. But yeah, I think unfortunately, yeah, we can't just be like shoving in on this game probably because of that. This did look like an awesome game. We have underperforming elite talent receiver, right, in Harrison, who I think because of the pricing, Brian, he's gonna go quite low owned on both sides, right?
I thought so too, but when I tweaked it a little bit this afternoon, I think he gets up there a little bit. I don't know if he'll be low owned. He'll be maybe 20, 25%, which still isn't too bad on a three gamer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not in the 50%
No,
range of
thank
these
God.
other guys. But it's a guy that's like a you could need to have him to win kind of upside. But yeah, I'm with you. It's tough. I mean, I think certainly in an MME build, like you're going to use it. I guess that kind of throw back to you and think like I assume like if the tackles were healthy, if you were playing like three lineups, like this would automatically be one of them because you get Harrison underperforming, you get the nice bringbacks. Like, are you still going to try that, or do you think you might like lower your allocation on the Arizona side of this because of those injuries?
I think I'll tweak projections a little bit, lower them, and still when I run the lineup builder, see what it gives me, because we still have Kyler Murray pretty low owned on both sites, and we have a guy who can run, a guy who has fantasy upside at quarterback on a slate where he could be the highest scorer. It just depends on if they can move the ball or not. And you mentioned Harrison. The last three games, he's expected to have scored roughly 13 points per game, 39. He's only scored 22 fantasy points. And if you've been stacking Arizona or playing Marvin Harrison and you've been watching the games, you see why. Dude gets tons of opportunities, just hasn't been able to convert, whether it's drops or Kyler missing him, not having time to connect. So I think just based on the low ownership and the high upside, you have to stack this game. And again, it's only three games, right? If this was an 8 game, 10 game slate, 12 game slate, it's like, all right, we can get away from this because of the potential offensive line issues, find another spot. But if the other two games are lower scoring, who's to say that Kyler, even with a banged up offensive line, doesn't end up as the optimal quarterback?
Yeah, and then again, throwing you the playoff kind of choke factor versus spoiler factor too. I think the ownership justifies giving it a shot, right? Even though we're acknowledging that it's pretty risky.
I agree. The other big injury in this game is James Conner. Went down last week with that knee injury, limited all week. I think the consensus thought was why they're out of the playoffs, why rush him back? But he's a tough dude. He's going to play, it sounds like. National reports said that he is likely to suit up. His backup, Trey Benson, his status is more up in the air. That would mean Michael Carter is the number two running back for Arizona. Give me your thoughts here, Jack, because my initial thought is okay, probably doesn't get James Conner level workloads with an injury, banged up knee, out of the playoffs. Let's give these younger guys some more work. But then I looked at James Conner's ownership and it's pretty low. So now I'm on and again, for those of you who wonder about picking players, a lot of it is looking at projections and ranges of outcomes and comparing it to ownership and making a decision. In a vacuum, I think I would want to play James Conner in this spot. But at his ownership, I would want to play a guy who has three touchdown upside.
Yeah, I haven't done this in advance, so I can't give an exact like swap out. But one thing you could do here is if you build not if you're not stacking this game, you stack one of the other two games. You could have like a 1v1, a Rams and a Cardinals guy in your lineup. I mean, Kyron and Connor are almost the same price, so you could try to come up with something where like if your lineup does well, you just play Kyron Williams and whoever the other person is from like Arizona because Kyron's like going to be way more popular. You're going to block people, right? But if your lineup didn't do that well, you could pivot to Connor, and then you're going to get a much. I'm guessing the way those like small field contexts work, if Connor's 30% in big large field, he's probably going to go like 15,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So that's one way to do it. But I think if you're game stacking, you just got to play them. I mean, like we said with Higgins, you just got to play these guys like you're going to play. And yeah, I mean, you're getting half the ownership on a guy with the same upside. Maybe more upside than Kyron and Chase Brown. I don't know. At least equal if you assume that Connor's healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I love the flex idea and swapping it out later. And we'll talk about late swap here in a little bit, but that is just a fantastic idea. If you like Connor or you're stacking an early game, having a spot roughly in this salary range to give you plenty of flexibility because you could drop down the Cup, who's low owned. You could, if you had enough salary, you can get up to Puka if you have a 2v2 in that final game. So really interesting spot to look at there. A showdown note from this game: Matt Prater remains out as the kicker, so Chad Ryland will be the kicker for Arizona. If you're interested in playing that showdown slate, it does have the biggest prize pools of the three, so I'm sure if you play showdown, you will be playing that slate. And just on LA side, Jack, really nothing. Their right tackle Rob Havenstein is questionable. He's hopeful to play. They have a veteran backup if he can't go. But the Rams, business as usual, fighting for the playoff spot. We know the rotation, so no real surprises in terms of their usage.
Yeah, I think we have the same situation, maybe not quite as good with Yoshivas on the Bengals. Demarcus Robinson plays 80% of the snaps. I think he runs a lot of wind sprints, but I mean, he does get. I'm just looking. Yeah, he's only one target a game the last three. I'm guessing he's kind of a deep threat. I'm gonna look probably while I throw this back to you. But I mean, again, just a very cheap game stacking piece that's going to be out there a lot. He could easily catch touchdown and be optimal, and it gives you a way to play these like super popular LA guys.
Yeah, and we've seen Demarcus Robinson score touchdowns on primetime slates before. Tutu Atwell's been getting a little more work, at least in terms of the passing game. So if you're not a fan of Demarcus Robinson, you could pivot to Tutu Atwell, who's even a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. He's seeing 2 targets a game. But either way, to just Jack's point, we have low-owned receivers that are not named Nakua, not named Cup, that you can stack with, whether it's Stafford or you're stacking the other side of this game.
One thought I'm really just asking you. I don't have the answer. Right? What's your thoughts on the? I mean, we've never seen the Cup Nakua disparity as high as it has been like recently. Like, do you think the ownership and projections are correct based on the usage, or do you think is Cup like just I just look at it like, oh wait, why is Cup's not doing anything? What's your take on that situation?
I truly don't know. I wish I knew better. I wish I had a great answer for you here, a little nugget. But Nakua's has been dominating him in terms of opportunity, expected fantasy points, red zone targets, targets in general. It's not a 1A, 1B situation anymore. It's a clear number one, number two situation. But it's still Cooper Cup. He's still $1,500 cheaper. He's still running out of the slot. And yes, he scored 5 points combined in the last 2 games. But they haven't scored that many points as an offense either. If we get a game where they're scoring 20 or 30 points, which is close to what the betting markets expect here, that means more opportunities for Cup. So whether or not you play Cup over Nakua, I'm not sure. But I think it is a spot where you have to play Cup more than what the field is, which isn't very much.
Yeah, and you could even look at it as you don't even need to drop to guys like Demarcus Robinson. You just say playing Stafford, Nakua, Cup
True.
together is already quite unique because if they're paying out for Nakua, they're probably not looking to pay out for Cup as well.
Yeah, and the difference is now Cup is $6,500. For days of the past, Cup was 8K, 9K, and it was hard to play both him and Puka Nakua. Not necessarily the case anymore. Stafford Nakua Cup leaves you 5K left per player on DraftKings, and again, plenty of flexibility to do that on this slate. So, Jack, any more specific notes about this game before we close it out with the strategies for the three gamer and how we can apply them to our contest?
Just if you're tilting Kyler Murray, you can come in the Discord. We'll be tilting there with you. I promise.
OccupyFantasy.com/Discord. Link is in the description below if you want to join the community there. Again, make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. It's free to do so. We do these videos for every short slate. We'll have them for the playoffs. One more Monday night game is coming up at least. And then we'll have the playoff slates. And of course, our writer Chris does videos for the main slates as well. So subscribing is the best way to support the channel in a free way. All right, 4 strategies for short slates. And they change a little bit because it's 3 games now. Leaving salary on the table, playing low-owned players, mega stacking or overstacking, game stacking, whatever you want to call it, and late swapping. Let's hit on these briefly, Jack, one by one. Lots of studs on this slate. Lots of tough decisions to be made at the top of the salary board. And with 3 games, it means we're probably leaving less salary than we were on these 2 gamers. Am I right?
Yeah, I think leaving salary is probably out on this slate. I think you really just don't even need to go there.
Really quickly, FanDuel, do we consider it with Dobbins at 4K?
Oh man, I mean, you could. I guess the question is how much, right? I'm just sure. I mean, I guess you could argue what on even a main like anything 2K or less is defensible at least, if not a little bit suboptimal. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't be going more than that. And you would. I don't think you would be wrong to just jam all the salary with every as much as you can.
I think so too. Yeah, I mean, I would probably set the lineup builder to 49.5 or 59.5 on FanDuel. And if you're getting trouble with some exposures, maybe drop it down to 49K or 59K on FanDuel. But again, I really don't see a situation where you need to use more than that unless you're late swapping and looking to get really different and you need to move up the leaderboard if the earlier games did not go your way, which we'll talk about more here in a second with late
And
swapping.
remember that for folks, the reason we talk about not leaving salary, it's not because it's optimal. It's not, right? Using
Right.
salary is optimal. It's that it gets you uniqueness. On a three gamer, we're just less worried about uniqueness in general. And but as we're going to get to, there's a lot more ways you can be unique without making that suboptimal choice to leave salary.
So I ran the lineup builder this afternoon, and this leads into strategy number 2, playing low owned plays. And organically, you're going to get a bunch. I would say at least one, but more than likely at least two per lineup. And by low ownership, we mean guys who are 20% or less owned. Jack, let's run through them just briefly. And again, there are a couple guys missing from this list that may be lower owned on FanDuel or DraftKings and not both sites. This is primarily guys who are low owned on both sites. Quarterback, Bo Nix, Kyler Murray, Drake May. Do you have a preference, or you're playing one lineup, you're trying to pick one of those three, or any thoughts just on those guys being low owned?
I've learned my lesson on short slates. Don't try to pick the quarterback. I think they're all great plays.
There, I love that. At running back, we've talked about this. The Denver running back situation is super low owned, especially outside of Javante. And then the New England running backs, we hit on this pretty much as well, but I think the New England running backs are probably the safer floor play, and maybe even higher upside with two guys to feed instead of potentially three.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think this might be a split site thing where if Dobbins is in on FanDuel, you really probably don't have to wade into this much,
True.
aside from like large field or Showdown. But DraftKings much more in play, right?
Yes, absolutely much more in play on DraftKings given the Dobbins relatively correct pricing. He still probably should be a little more, but relatively correct when we compare it to FanDuel. At receiver, a wide range of guys in different salary tiers that are going to be low owned on both sides. We mentioned Cooper Cup, Joshua Palmer, the underperforming wide receiver. Number 2 receiver for Denver, Devon Vele. He'll be lower owned than Marvin Mims, who will certainly outscore him on 3 touches. All of the New England receivers not named Kayshawn Booty. Booty's going to be popular. If you want to play that, go for it. But we get Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas at low ownership. Quentin Johnston, who can seemingly put up 2 touchdowns in any game this season at any time. Love him at low ownership. You mentioned D-Rob and Tutu Atwell for the Rams. Yosivas, we've talked about already. And then Michael Wilson for the Cardinals. So, Jack, basically every team has some sort of low-owned receiver that sees 70, 80, 90% of the snaps.
And it's kind of astonishing that I mean, I just, like double checking. Yeah, the Chargers do play the Patriots, who are horrible. Like you have Palmer and Quentin Johnson, like 10% owned. They're like the starting outside receiver. I mean, I know McConkey's the target leader, but yeah, I mean, it's just kind of astonishing that that stack is and those receivers are so low owned in a just smash spot. I mean, unless the Chargers just actively don't throw the ball, you think they're going to score some points here.
And they're cheap. They're not even like overpriced. They're normally priced, if not underpriced, in this spot, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, and they have what the third highest total on the slate. I'm just sorting here. I think there's got to be right behind.
Yep.
Yep, behind Cincinnati and LA. So yeah, I mean that's a great spot.
It seems for those of you who want the picks, and it seems like Jack and I have come to the conclusion here that LA is one of the best stacks on the slate, and it's occupied model approved, Jack. So I think if we had to say, if we got the question, who's your favorite stack on Saturday? It seems like we both agree that LA's got to top the list for salary saving, for ownership, for upside, for matchup, all the above.
Yeah, I think exactly, and especially when you bring in the Butte versus the tight ends that you mentioned, right? Like and like you see this in the NHL too. When you play like a cheap stack, you can just put anything you want around it. And with this slate, there's so many expensive studs. Like that's I think that's going to give you almost more uniqueness too, right? Just because people are not going to have all those guys in the same lineup.
And it's such a good strategy in small field contests to get the high floor of all of the studs and just pay down a little bit at quarterback and tight end, especially in this day and age of the NFL where not every team is scoring, 30, 40, 50 points. So, all right, let's talk about mega stacking. We mentioned it briefly earlier. Optimal lineups certainly are not doing that across the industry when you run lineup builders and optimizers and whatnot. At most, it's giving you 3-1 stacks, really. So I think you have to be careful here because it's 3 games and specific offenses. We're probably not 4-man stacking New England. maybe four-man stacking Denver. I guess I'll ask you, Jack. You're the expert here. Where are we drawing the line on four-man stacks? Where are we drawing the line on how many run backs per team?
Uh, I mean, I don't want to say there's any black and white rules, but I feel like you could kind of just go by the team totals and say, Cincinnati. Do you have a valid format stack that doesn't use up like 30K? That's one question. And the second question is, do you have a way of do you have a bring back you like, right? Because you don't want to play like a 4 by 0. I think certainly Cincinnati, LA, and both LAs are in play. I guess where I might draw the line is like Arizona. Like, do you even have to go there?
Probably not. I don't know, man. I mean, I am such a sucker for it, so I probably will allow it. I don't know how many lineups I'll end up with, anyways. But and there are no mispriced guys for Arizona. McBride is expensive. Harrison's relatively affordable. Connor could be expensive if he's limited in any way. So yeah, I think I would probably limit it to three Cardinals. I would imagine. I think that's the best way to think about it. Three-man stack and bring back one or two, probably two favorites, and then four-man stack all the favorites and bring back one, maybe two of the underdogs. It's probably, if someone just needs a template of how to approach the tomorrow's slate without getting too into the weeds, that's probably the best way to think about it.
Yeah, and just for if folks are out there thinking like, it just feels gross to click 4 man stacks in on a 3 gamer. Just folks can look back at like people win the main slates with 4 man
True,
stacks. Like
it's
like
true.
Detroit has, I think Detroit 4 man stacks have been optimal like 3 4 times this year.
Yes.
Even if they didn't win it, they score like 50 points. So
Right.
yeah, it absolutely wins. The field will not do it. And I think at least with those 3 teams, we have some good ways to do it.
Totally agree. All right, let's talk about late swapping now, and then we will get out of here. Games at three different time windows. So 1 o'clock, 4:30, and 8:10. So we'll probably have 20 minutes or so to late swap after the first game, maybe 30 if we're lucky if that game goes fast. And we'll probably have 40 minutes or so to late swap before the nighttime game, which is probably the more impactful late swap window. But talk to me, Jack, what you plan to do tomorrow and what you're going to be looking for large field GPPs, your 20 max and your 150 max, and I'll try to hit on what I'm looking for in small field.
Yeah, so for the large field stuff, you really just have to, like you said, you get 20 minutes. You have to make good use of your time. You have to focus on the lineups that are doing the best, and then the ones that have the most PMR. So I would say like if you have lineups that have full game stacks left, it's almost not even worth it. It's just very difficult to try to figure out like the optimal builds based on that. But if you have like a game stack that went and it's pretty high up, you got a couple players left, you just need to look ahead of you on the leaderboard, and it's actually easier on the app than it is on the website, which is interesting. But you just gotta look ahead of you, look for people that have maybe the same lineup as you with the same PMR or like the same PMR and have more points than you, and then based on that, you can figure out how to build. If no one ahead of you has the same PMR that you do, you should just play like the optimal chalkiest guys possible. Use all the salary, and then you kind of get more and more chaos from there to try to get different because you'll be drawing dead if you play that stuff. So that's kind of what I do, and I think I'll kick it over to you on the small field and just say with the small field, I imagine it makes sense to, if you can, think about those things in advance, like
Yes.
set your lineup up in a way that you might give yourself more flexibility to swap.
Definitely. And just really quickly, when you mentioned if you're the highest PMR in your contest, and it doesn't look like they're, unless a game completely goes off later, it looks like you're in a pretty good spot and no one's going to pass you. And you just mentioned play the chalkiest lineups. I think the advice for people out there is just look at the model or the builder or whichever projections you use. And this isn't the time to take stands or like have really out there opinions. Just play what the projections are telling you the best, and ownership is going to follow that. And just play the highest owned player at each position that fits your lineup, and that's going to give you the highest chance of winning because you don't need to get cute and try to beat guys that are ahead of you.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and for small field, it's kind of the same thing where you're looking to see who's ahead of you, how many minutes are remaining. It's a lot easier to see your entire contest, obviously, in small field. And I think the James Conner situation is the perfect example where sometimes people fret about the final spot in their lineup. Should I play this guy or this guy? And really, if on a slate like this, when you have the opportunity to not even have to make that decision at 1 p.m. or 4 p.m., you don't have to make it till 8 p.m. So I think unless you really like a lineup, leave yourself some flexibility in the second game and especially the third game. That way, the more information you have, the better decision you can make. Don't worry about having to make a lineup decision so early in the day, which I think so many people are accustomed to doing. They're not even thinking about it that way.
Yep, makes perfect sense to me. And again, it kind of also depends on like, are you really trying to get first, or would you be happy with like top five? Right, that's another consideration for
Yes.
folks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's going to depend on your bankroll and all these other factors, whether that's the case for you. So that'll do it for this video. I think the next time, Jack, we'll see you is playoffs. So hopefully we can get a win for you tomorrow. That way we can promote it during the playoff videos.
Yeah, let's get up there, man. Good luck tomorrow.
Yes, good luck to you as well. Again, subscribe to the channel to get notified when we post any more NFL videos. PGA starts next week. If you're a PGA fan, we're going to start a new PGA series here on YouTube. So if you're interested in that, let us know in the comments what you'd like to see from that series. Give us a thumbs up. Best free way to support the channel. Any questions? I'm going to be building lineups for the next 12 hours. So I'll be monitoring the YouTube channel. I'll answer them. And again, Discord is the best way to talk with us and other members of the community, sweat out the games. And again, we mentioned it many times, but OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get that extra edge. Not many of you are going to pay for fantasy content and tools. We understand that. We do these free videos to help everyone out. But if you want that extra edge, make sure you check out our articles at OccupyFantasy.com, our model, which ranks every player for FanDuel and DraftKings, our projected ownership to give you the best information on how to construct lineups, and our builder that Jack literally built by hand that allows you to build up to 300 lineups using all the rules and strategies that we use to win short slates and showdowns. So for Jack, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening and good luck and enjoy the Saturday 3-gamer in week 17.